Imagine a king so stubborn that if he existed today, he could freeze an entire Wi-Fi network purely out of pride. Welcome to Egypt. And boy, things escalated quickly. Egypt was basically the most successful startup of the ancient world, except instead of shiny offices and trendy coffee machines, it had pyramids, sand, and a management style that relied heavily on fear and overwork. Running this empire was Pharaoh, a man whose confidence levels were so high he practically invented the phrase, "because I said so." Meanwhile, the Israelites formed the invisible workforce behind Egypt's success. They built, carried, hauled, stacked, lifted, and repeated. They were essential, but treated as replaceable. And Pharaoh, always dramatic, noticed something that sent him into panic mode. The Israelites were growing in number. In his mind, this wasn't normal population growth. No, this was a threat, a blinking red notification, something like the ancient equivalent of getting 20 messages from the family group chat in 2 minutes. This will not end well, so he came up with a plan, a terrible plan, a plan about as brilliant as trying to solve an argument by sending a passive-aggressive voice note. Pharaoh ordered that every Hebrew baby boy should be thrown into the Nile. Yes, that was his big idea. But this is exactly the kind of moment when the story takes a sudden turn. A Hebrew mother refused to play by Pharaoh's rules. Instead of letting her son become part of the king's meltdown strategy, she placed him gently inside a woven basket and launched what was essentially the world's first aquatic Uber. Destination: survival. The basket drifted along the Nile until it reached a surprising address, the royal estate. Pharaoh's daughter spotted the baby, opened the basket, and instantly made a decision faster than most people choose a show on streaming. She said, "I'll keep him," just like that. Zero hesitation, zero bureaucracy. The baby, now named Moses, was officially adopted into Egyptian royalty. Moses grew up with silk clothes, polished floors, and all the privileges of palace life. But outside those walls, his people were suffering. He belonged to one world but lived in another, and the contrast followed him everywhere. He learned to read royal records, speak Egyptian, and navigate politics, but he also saw workers bent under endless labor, faces tight with exhaustion. He lived a double life, the comfort of a prince combined with the uneasy knowledge of injustice. And this is where things start feeling awkward, because Moses was not just another palace child. He was someone whose origin, identity, and purpose were quietly pushing him toward a future he didn't yet understand. Soon, the tension would break. Soon, he would make a decision that changed everything. And soon, Egypt's most stubborn king would meet the one man capable of challenging him, though Moses himself had no idea what was coming next. Moses' life had already taken some strange turns, but things were about to get even more complicated. Because no story like this works without a memorable cast, and Egypt's lineup was something else. First, there was Moses himself, the prince who never asked to be a prince. He had two main talents: running away impressively fast and taking care of sheep without complaining. As far as skill sets go, that's niche, but surprisingly useful for what was coming. Then there was Pharaoh, Egypt's authoritarian CEO. If he existed today, he'd be the kind of executive who rejects even free bottled water just to show authority. Everything about him screamed, "My way," or "No, actually, there is no other way." Next in the cast list came Aaron, Moses' older brother. Think of him as the official spokesperson, the designated public relations department of a future mission Moses didn't even know he'd need. If Moses was unsure about speaking, Aaron was there to step in with, "Don't worry, I got this." And finally, the people, thousands of Israelites who had mastered the ancient art of complaining. They could witness a miracle in the morning and still find something to grumble about at lunchtime. Certified professionals in dissatisfaction. With the cast introduced, the story shifts. Because before Moses ever thought about leadership, he made a decision that changed the entire direction of his life. One day, he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. The injustice hit him hard. He stepped in, acted impulsively, and things escalated way beyond what he expected. Suddenly, Moses wasn't a prince anymore. He was a target. Pharaoh didn't just disapprove, he wanted Moses eliminated. So Moses ran. Again, very fast, straight into the desert, a location with more sand than plot stability. This was the beginning of Moses' new lifestyle, which included sheep, more sheep, and long silent walks that felt suspiciously like the ancient version of becoming a freelancer who didn't choose freelancing. Years passed. Moses built a quiet, predictable routine, but life has a way of interrupting the predictable, especially when you're meant for something bigger. And yes, Moses came back into the story, older and probably tired, very tired. Then came the moment no one sees coming the first time they hear this story. A bush, on fire, but not burning. As in, flames everywhere. Plant totally fine. Already strange. But then a voice spoke from it, giving Moses a mission that made everything else in his life look extremely small. He was told to go back to Egypt and free his people. Moses tried to cancel the mission the same way someone tries to cancel an unexpected subscription. Are you sure it's me? Maybe check the name. But there was no unsubscribe button here. And this is where the story flips. Hard. Moses returned to Egypt. And yes, it gets messy fast. After years in the desert, he walked back into the palace with a message that would soon become the most repeated phrase in the ancient world. Let my people go. Pharaoh's answer, no. And so the cycle began. Moses said it again. Pharaoh said no again. Repeat until it becomes a meme with terrible workplace communication energy. Pharaoh's stubbornness could easily power a Wi-Fi router for 24 hours. Pure ego electricity. Since words weren't working, the situation escalated into something Egypt absolutely did not have in the user manual. Plagues. Not subtle ones, not symbolic ones. Real, chaotic, animation-worthy plagues that made everyone question reality. The first one hit the River Nile. Suddenly the water turned into blood, thick, red and dramatic. Imagine turning on your faucet and getting tomato juice. Egypt was not prepared for that. Then came the frogs. Not a few frogs, not decorative frogs, frogs everywhere, on beds, in bowls, inside sandals, basically turning Egypt into a surprise interior design project, frog chic. Next came the insects, swarms of gnats and flies that made everyone slap the air like they were in a very uncoordinated dance battle. Then the livestock got sick, then boils appeared on people's skin, and Egypt collectively questioned all of its life choices. But it didn't stop. Hard-mode hail appeared from the sky, hail strong enough to destroy crops, crush roofs, and generally ruin everyone's day. Then came the locusts, finishing up whatever the hail had missed like nature's most aggressive cleaning crew. After that, darkness rolled in. Not nighttime darkness, not cloudy day darkness. A heavy, suffocating blackout, as if Egypt forgot to pay the national electricity bill. No one could see anything for days. Through all of this, Moses kept repeating the same request, let my people go. And Pharaoh kept responding with mood swings that belonged in a historical soap opera. Fine, leave. 2 minutes later. Wait, come back. It was emotional instability on a royal level. Then came the final plague, the one that broke Pharaoh's ego completely. It was devastating, and for the first time he understood that he was up against something far bigger than political control. He finally gave in. The Israelites packed quickly, so quickly in fact, that their bread didn't even have time to rise. Unleavened bread, the world's earliest fast food. They marched out of Egypt in a hurry, finally free, finally leaving the empire that had held them captive for generations. And here's where things get awkward, again. Because the moment Pharaoh realized they were really gone, his pride kicked back into full power. He ordered his entire army to pursue them, launching what would become one of the most dramatic chase sequences in ancient history. The Israelites had finally escaped Egypt, but their celebration didn't last long. When they looked ahead and saw the sea stretching endlessly in front of them, panic rose instantly. This was not a small lake. This was a giant, impossible barrier. This is it. The end. Game over. Egypt behind them, water in front of them, and absolutely no escape plan on the table. But Moses didn't panic. Instead, he stepped forward and activated what could only be described as Red Sea mode on. What happened next felt like the ancient equivalent of suddenly finding free Wi-Fi in the middle of nowhere. Unexpected, unbelievable, and absolutely life-saving. The water began pulling back, rising into towering walls on both sides, leaving a long, dry pathway right through the middle. Simple visual, massive impact. The people stared, stunned. Then they moved, slowly at first, then faster, realizing this wasn't a dream or a mirage. Thousands stepped onto the dry ground, walking between walls of water that looked like nature had paused itself just for them. It was dramatic, cinematic, the kind of moment that would definitely get a slow-motion zoom in an animated episode. Behind them, Pharaoh's army arrived, ready to reclaim control. Horses, chariots, soldiers, everything the empire had. And because pride was the unofficial motor of Egyptian leadership, they rushed directly into the same path the Israelites were using. Apparently, no one stopped to think, should we follow them into a supernatural tunnel? They just went for it. But the sea had its own timeline. Once the last of the Israelites reached solid ground on the far side, everything changed. The water walls trembled, shifted, and then collapsed, dramatically, decisively, back into place. The path disappeared. The army disappeared with it. And with one wave, literally, the greatest empire of the ancient world lost the chase. The irony was almost too perfect. Pharaoh had spent the entire story trying to control everything. His people, his land, his slaves, his image. But in the end, he couldn't control the one thing that mattered most, the outcome. He tried to hold on to power and ended up losing the one battle he believed he couldn't lose. This moment mattered. It became one of the clearest symbols of liberation ever told. A turning point not just for Moses, but for an entire nation learning what freedom actually looks like. Moses, once reluctant and unsure, now stood as the leader who faced an empire and walked through the impossible. And of course, history remembers victories loudly and defeats quietly. Egyptian records almost never mention losses. That's why no ancient papyrus says, about the Red Sea, our bad. But the story wasn't finished yet. Freedom had arrived, yes, but so had the desert. And the desert came with its own challenges. Long journeys, uncertain paths, and a community very ready to complain at full volume. The Israelites had crossed the sea, leaving the might of Egypt behind them, and Moses stood on the far shore with the kind of story no one could ever top. After everything, palace life, exile, plagues, a miracle road through the ocean, his journey finally made sense. Moses had started as a smuggled baby and ended as the man who defeated the greatest no in ancient history. From the river to the palace, from the desert to the sea, from fleeing for his life to leading an entire nation, his path had been anything but predictable, and honestly not bad for someone who tried to decline the mission during the opening conversation. Sometimes the least confident person in the room becomes the one with the biggest impact. But the story isn't just a sequence of dramatic moments. It's a reminder of something far more universal. Ordinary people often get pulled into extraordinary events. Moses didn't set out to become a leader. He didn't want attention, fame, or responsibility. He simply made decisions one after another, shaped by circumstances larger than himself. And yet, every one of those choices built toward a turning point that changed history. What makes this story surprisingly modern is how relatable the core emotions still are. Fear, doubt, confusion, courage, frustration, stubbornness. Those haven't changed at all. You can swap out pyramids for skyscrapers and sandals for sneakers, and the human experience stays strangely familiar. The story remains alive not because of the setting, but because people today still wrestle with the same inner battles. And Pharaoh? His legacy is a cautionary tale about extreme stubbornness. If he existed today, he'd probably be losing arguments on Twitter every 5 minutes, replying with bold confidence while everyone else wonders how he reached those conclusions. His refusal to adapt didn't just cost him a fight, it cost him everything. Moses' journey also reveals something about perspective. From inside the palace, he looked like an Egyptian. From inside the desert, he looked like a wanderer. From inside the Red Sea's path, he looked like a man guided by something beyond logic. Leadership didn't arrive because he was perfect. It arrived because he was willing to step forward, even when he felt unqualified. And that's what makes the story endure. It's less about miracles and more about movement. The movement that happens when people choose courage over fear, purpose over comfort, and growth over certainty. Moses didn't know the full plan. He just walked the path in front of him, one step at a time. So now the sea is behind them, the desert ahead, and a whole new chapter waiting to unfold. But as for this part of the story, the question goes to you: which Bible story should I simplify next? Jonah, David, or Samson?